Coaching's fantastic, though. I mean,
I finally, after 40 years, coaching my granddaughter's third grade team, I got axed. In 4 years. So they said, you can't come back, you gotta miss a game. And it's like, then call the rules. They had no zoning for third grade. Close game, 3 minutes to go, and they throw a zone on us. And I'm trying to get the poor kid's attention, so I'm yelling across the floor because there's one ref. He's on the, I said, there's zoning. Made the girl cry. So they kicked me out. And the dad was gonna fight me after the game. You make my daughter cry. Don't zone us. Follow the rules.
Right?
So, yeah. First for everything.
I coached in the territorial league when 3rd and 4th grade, and I had 2 teams. I was 20-something, played basketball my entire life, and one of my teams had a really tall girl, like really tall, and that, I think they were the A team. And then I had a B team. Well, we were playing Triangle. I coached out of Mapleton, and we had a game with Triangle Lake, and I was like, the A team is just going to murder this Triangle Lake team. Like, it is not going to be fun. It is not sportsmanlike. There's nothing I can do because this girl just gets the ball and turns around and shoots it and makes it, you know? So I told my teams, I told the parents and I told the teams, hey, B, they have this wrong on the schedule. B team, I need you to be here to play against this team, and A team, I need you to come later, or whatever the case may be.
Glad you can make it.
Yeah.
Made it through the entire game. We still ended up winning, but not like,
Have a seat.
100 to 2.
So
And
we
so-
are going to record on
The president
on
of the
YouTube and
area-
Facebook Live.
Okay.
She said,
So people
you
can watch it
switch
from
your
home
teams?
too.
I was like, baby,
Hey, how
All right.
good? How's it
I have to
going?
report this. You're gonna have to forfeit that game. And I was like, I did it out of sportsman,
I
and
thought
at
I
the
should
time,
come
I
again
really liked
since
the
last
president
year's
of the
training was
territorial
your,
sports program.
you know,
And he called me and said, why did you make that
the
decision?
old
I said,
brain.
in the
Needs a
spirit of
refresher.
everyone having fun. It was because I have this tall girl. She doesn't care when she plays. She just wants to play.
And we'll stream out the
And I
slides for
felt that it was way better for sportsmanship.
Yeah.
He goes, I absolutely agree with you. You didn't get league approved. And so you'll have to forfeit that game. And I'm like, okay, well, these girls still know they won. Hi.
I always went ahead and did it. And it was always on behalf of the kids, what was best for the kids.
Great.
And I plead for
Yeah, I know.
plead for forgiveness.
Yeah,
I
this is,
appreciate the handouts.
Yes.
I'm a paper person.
I am too. I really like electronics, and I can keep organized with electronics, but I like to see the final in paper.
Helps me retain it, I think.
And you can scratch all
Ken,
over.
right?
No, I'm Dave.
Dave, sorry.
Yeah.
Tammy Sue.
Tammy, okay.
Christine.
Christine, Tammy Sue, nice to meet
I'm
you.
Cameron.
Cameron.
Thanks for coming. I guess we could get started. I'm Jim Piper, the finance director here. My background was as a municipal auditor with a local CPA firm for 10 years, and I went and traveled in municipal auditor. I got to go to city and states and see pretty much their systems, and lo and behold, the same issues everywhere. But I really learned budgeting and the format for the budget through writing the reports. Oregon has their set way of formatting the report. It's spelled out in the ORSs, so bear with me. It's kind of a dry presentation. I'll do my best to keep this going along. It shouldn't take us very long. So I want to just basically cover the budget law so that we know, okay, what does the state of Oregon require from us? Like I mentioned earlier, there's a standard format of how to budget. There's good reasons to follow the law. There's actual civil penalties if we don't follow the law. That being said, though, there's still a good product that comes out of the budget. It's a policy. It's an action plan for that year, and that's set by you as the budget committee members is approved, and then it goes to council for adoption. And we have to have a budget legally before we can even spend money by the 1st of July to keep the water running, the toilets flushing, the streets swept. So local budget law is spelled out in the Oregon Revised Statutes. ORS is 294-305 to 294-565. It establishes standard procedures, like I said. Every municipality is going to follow the same structure. And that's for good reason. These budgets go to the assessor's office, they go to the Oregon Department of Revenue, and they need to have consistency. The budget outlines programs and fiscal policies. It requires estimates of resources and expenditures. It encourages citizen involvement, i.e. we have citizens on the budget committee who are giving us input. And it controls expenditures of public funds. So why do we follow budget law? As I said earlier, it has civil penalties. Straight from ORS 294.100, any public official who expends any public funds in excess of the amounts or for any other or different purpose than authorized by law shall be civilly liable to return the money by suit of the district attorney of the district in which the offense is committed, or at the suit of any taxpayer of such district if the expenditure constitutes malfeasance in office or willful or wanton neglect or duty. So, yeah, it's got teeth, so we want to make sure that we do it right. As I said earlier, the budget is a financial plan containing estimates of revenues and expenditures for a single fiscal year. Our fiscal year begins July 1 and it ends June 30 of each year. Budgeting allows a local government to evaluate its needs in light of the revenue sources available to meet those needs. A complete budget justifies the imposition of ad valorem according to value property taxes. And it's also an internal control mechanism because department heads will review their budget actuals each month and report back if there's anything that looks odd, essentially. A policy document funds the plans and priorities of the city. And that's pretty important. I've been taking trainings every year on the budget through the Government Finance Officers Association, and they have a distinguished budget award that they give out for governments that follow their criterion and apply for it. And they're really pushing the tie-in to the strategic plan, long-range plans, capital improvement plans. They want to see that tie-in between the budget. And so it's really important that we have that tie-in. It's a communication document, expresses the city's goals to the citizens. Again, that strategic planning piece. The Budget Committee consists of the governing body, the City Council, and an equal number of appointed citizens who are qualified electors of the city. In other words, you have to be registered to vote. The primary roles are to hear the budget message, hold the public meetings, hear public comments, review and discuss the proposed budget, make revisions to the budget if necessary, approve the budget, and approve each tax rate. And so we have a tax rate for the city of Creswell. We also have a tax for the Creswell Urban Renewal District. So you'll hear both of those. So the budget cycle has 9 steps. It's appoint a budget officer. I believe our appointment is through city charter, if I remember right. And prepare the proposed budget, publish the budget notices. We have the budget notice going out for our meeting in 2 weeks. We'll be meeting here again in 2 weeks. Budget committee meets. The committee approves the budget. The quorum is required. So of the 14, we have to have 8 at least show up to approve the budget. The budget summary and notice of the budget hearing are published after it's approved. So there's an actual form that gets printed in the newspaper that'll show the budget by in full in the newspaper. You'll notice the notice for the budget committee just says that we'll meet at such time, at such place, and to discuss the budget. The budget will actually be handed out at the first meeting. The budget notice will be, or the budget message will be read aloud. You'll receive that, and then we'll do a brief overview of the budget. I'll put together a slideshow that goes over each of the budgets, each department, each fund, to kind of explain what's different this year. And then the budget's filed and levy is certified, so we have to take the adopted budget, once it's adopted by the city council in June, to the Lake County assessor, so they can start collecting property taxes. So the budget and fund structure, again, it's spelled out in the ORS is how we have to do it. It's a standard form. But first, some people might want to know what a fund is. A fund is a set of accounts used to record estimates, estimated resources and requirements for specific activities and objectives. Sounds very legalistic. A good analogy is just a bucket. Like, this bucket is for policing. This bucket is for the general fund. This bucket is for the streets. And we keep revenues and expenditures separated in those buckets or funds so that it's easy to keep track of what's going on in each of those activities. All resources and requirements must be budgeted, and it must be budgeted in good faith. So the estimates, you can't just estimate pie in the sky and hope that you bring in more revenue than you really should anticipate. There's different types of governmental activities, and they require different use of various types of funds. And state statute outlines the basic fund types and how they're may be used in the budget and accounting processes. And we'll go over those funds. The general fund is the biggest fund. That's where we collect the property taxes and the franchise fees. This is a fund in which governmental units which are not required to be accounted in other funds. And usually it's the largest and most important accounting activity for state and local governments. You have to at least have a general fund. If you're a small government, you're at least going to have a general fund. A district, let's say a small water district, they'll at least have a general fund. And this is where funds that aren't required to be accounted in other funds are kept. So in the general fund, it has programs or organizational units. And we're required in the general fund to budget by those organizational units. We call them departments. So you'll see a budget for the general admin. You'll see a budget for culture and recreation, public safety, and then we have planning and land use as a department. Special revenue funds are used to account for revenues derived from specific taxes or other dedicated or restricted revenue sources. They're usually required by statute, charter, or local ordinance to finance particular functions or activities of government. Special revenue fund may be required for financing either current operating expenditures or capital outlays or both. It may have a definite life, a limited life, or it may remain in effect until discontinued or revised by appropriate legislative action. The best example is the street fund. We get state highway taxes from the state gas tax and vehicle registration that are restricted to only be used on roads. So we can't put them in the general fund. We can't put them in the water fund. So we have a special revenue fund called the street fund, and that's where those taxes are collected, and the operating expenses for the roads are also kept in that fund. Other examples are the bicycle footpath fund, which is really just a 1% of the state highway tax funds that has to go towards pedestrian pathways like bike paths, walking trails. And then the building department fund gets its revenues from building permits, and those funds can only be used to do building inspections and the administrative function of tracking those permits and issuing certificates of occupancy. The enterprise funds are, think of those as like little businesses within the budget, right? So they're established to account for financing of self-supporting activities of government units which render services on a user charge basis. The most universal type of government enterprise is the public utility engaged in the provision of such basic services as water and sewer. There's electricity utilities in some governments. We just provide water, sewer. Revenue sources include charges for services, gross revenue for goods sold, hookup fees, repair charges, penalties and interest earnings. And we have the water, sewer, like I mentioned. We have an airport fund, and we're working on the stormwater fund.
So Jim, because the airport is an enterprise, we can't use like tourism dollars to put into the new bathrooms we want to put at the north end. That wouldn't be allowed because it's an enterprise?
No, it would be allowed. So you would spend the tourism dollars out of the general fund tourism activities, but it would have to be specifically, you'd have to justify the tourism.
How would it get tourism? Like parachuters coming and things like that?
That would be a hard justification.
Okay.
But there would have to be some justification to spend tourism dollars and
Okay. Well, thank goodness Director Humble's good at grant writing. But it's just something I've been thinking about, saving up the question for you.
Yes, tourism dollars, they have their own stipulations as far as what they can be used on, and generally have to justify that it's bringing tourism into your city.
Okay, thank
I
you.
mean, there are other obvious ones.
Yeah.
Like events that are held that attract people from around the county, but yeah, that would be a tough one. There's also reserve funds, so they're established by ordinance or resolution to hold monies to accumulate for expended purposes, and they're specified in ORS 280.050. We have a water reserve fund and sewer reserve funds. Debt service funds are used to pay off long-term debt, so we have the local improvement district fund. Hasn't had any activity in a couple of years now because we finished receiving and paying off the debt for the LID up on 5th Street a couple of years ago. But we'll keep that fund for the next local improvement district that comes along, which looks like it'll be 2nd Street. We'll dive into that project in the coming years. Capital project funds, they created to account for all resources and expenditures used for building or acquisition of capital facilities and are non-recurring major expenditure items by a governmental unit, except for those financed by special assessment and enterprise funds. So we have a capital improvement fund where we put aside capital reserves to spend on City Hall, for example, and street capital improvement fund that we've been putting money aside for larger street projects. These are monies that we receive in excess of our operating costs in the street fund. So the budget structure, it has to include the 2 prior year actual that come from the audit. So if you open up a budget here from last year, I like using a smaller fund because it's just easier to see. So here's the building department. And you'll see there's the first 2-year actuals, reading from left to right. Cameron, if you wouldn't mind passing that around, sharing it. So the first 2 years, you need to show the actual results that came in from the audit. Then you show the current year budget. So in this case, we're in current year, fiscal year 23, ending June 30, 2023. So we'd show that amount. And then for additional analysis, we had it projected, because we can get pretty close to where we're at this point. We can annualize those revenues and get close to what we think we're going to collect or expend in the case of expenditures by the end of June 30. And then you'll see the proposed budget at the first meeting. And that would be the proposed budget beginning July 1, 2023, ending June 30, 2020. And that gets really confusing. You've got multiple years open and you're in the current year, what did we spend last year, and what do we think we're gonna spend next year? Sometimes your head can just spin trying to figure out which year you're in when you got multiple years open. But the most important will be for the proposed budget will be that last filled out column will be the proposed budget for 23-24. Again, the revenue should reflect an accurate estimate of what is anticipated during the coming fiscal year. Revenues are not appropriated, so when you hear about legal appropriations, that's the term they use. Appropriations are the expenditures, so we can only expend what is legally appropriated by the budget committee's approval and the city council's adoption. So fund structure, expenditures. This is the standard for all the municipalities. In order to lawfully spend money, expenditures must be prepared according to a budget law identified in ORS 294.388. Ultimately, the requirements state that the expenditures shall be estimated in each budget period, shall be identified by organizational unit or program, or shall equal the total resources. The major classifications are shown below. So in the budget fund, as I said, you'll see appropriations by department. But we do break it down in greater detail in the budget document. And then in the funds, other than the general fund, you'll see it broken down by personal services. And I actually changed that to personnel services. I didn't catch that in the slides, but this year it'll say personnel services. It was a wording change in the ORS. I used to say personal services, but now it's personnel services, so basically employee costs. Materials and services, those are the materials and any professional services that are required out of house, like consultants that we bring in. Capital outlay, those are our capital expenditures, generally over $5,000. Non-routine stuff that has an estimated useful life of greater than a year. So basically buildings, equipment, vehicles. Debt service, payments on debt. Transfers, so there may be a transfer out from the general fund to another fund to cover expenditures. We talked about, you talked about spending tourism dollars from the general fund to the airport fund. Maybe we may do that through a transfer from general fund to the airport. Or you could directly expend it if it's tourism activity right out of the general fund. But transfers are a way to move money from one fund to another. Generally, it's coming out of the general fund to other funds to help with operating expenditures, not the other way around, because remember the reserve funds are for capital expenditures in those funds related to those activities, like the street capital reserve fund is getting used for street projects. And then the special revenue funds shouldn't be transferring out to the general fund because, for example, street funds can only be used on streets. The only caveat is that there's a 1% of street funds that has to be transferred over to the bike pedestrian fund. So there will be a street fund transfer out to the bike fund of 1% of the revenues received. And then you have an operating contingency. These are things that, okay, we didn't know this was going to happen. We need to move money out of operating contingency. You'll never see money actually expended in that contingency line. So when you look back at actuals and you go, wow, they've never spent the contingency, it's because the contingency will actually get moved up by resolution up to another line item. So we'll reduce that contingency amount through resolution during the year when there's something that comes up that we didn't plan on. And that will go up into like personnel services, materials and services, capital outlay. And there's some special rules about how much you can move without having a budget hearing and printing the budget again in the newspaper. So we'll get to that a little later. The next slide just is a little graphical illustration. I passed around the budget, but this slide shows the personnel services, in that example, materials and services and capital outlay have their categories, and underneath that are actual individual expenditure line items. And then you've got your actual prior 2 years, your budget, and your projected, and then the next column will be your proposed budget for the coming fiscal year. Again, revenues and expenditures must balance. So we triple check this thing and have somebody proof it, because no matter how many times you look at something, once you look at it so many times, you just don't see it. So then you have somebody else proof it, and hopefully it doesn't come to you not balanced, but if it does, please say something so that we can correct it before we actually approve the budget. So we'll get into the fiscal year 2023-24 budget process. I put in meeting dates for your convenience so that we can schedule those. Make sure that you all have the chance to schedule around those. Tuesday, May 9th will be the presentation of the budget message. It'll be same place, same time, 6:30. You'll get next year's budget. You'll get the budget message, and then we'll do a little slideshow presentation and have some time for some questions. Then you have 2 weeks to really pour through the budget. If you have any questions in that 2-week period, you can email me and say, hey, what's going on with this line item? It looks weird. What's the deal here? And then I can research and get back to you. And maybe it was a department request and it's a one-off this year that we have to do a special maintenance project, for example. That you're welcome to ask those questions before the budget meeting, the next budget meeting, so that we can clear all those. What I'll do also is put together a Q&A of those questions. So I won't call anybody out and say, so-and-so asked this question. It'll just be a question and answer anonymously. But I'll make a list of those so that we can post them on the website. We can get those out to people in advance of the second meeting. Second meeting, the budget committee will do the deliberations, and they'll approve the budget either as presented, or if you've got amendments, you can propose those amendments and they can be approved as amended. So that's what you all get to do at that meeting, and hopefully it takes a meeting. If we have to, we can have another meeting after that, but we do have to have some time because of the publication of the budget meeting notices has to be at least 5 days before and 2 notices a week apart. So you'll know, we actually send out the notice for the second meeting, I think, before we even have the first meeting. Because of the timeline. We have to get it to the paper in time for them to publish it, but and that is also detailed in the ORSs about how you have to get the notices out, how many days. So if you can't sleep at night, I've given you the handbook. This is the 17-page version. There is an actual budget book for municipal governments. This is the abridged version. There's like hundreds of pages on the law surrounding budget. Once the budget is approved by the budget committee, you're no longer have to come to the committee meetings, but you're welcome to come to the adoption of the budget at the city council meeting, which will occur on June 12th. There will actually be a public hearing, and you're also welcome to speak at that public hearing. Just because you're a budget committee member doesn't mean you're not also a citizen who's allowed to speak. So I encourage budget committee members to come to the adoption meeting. There's also some limitations on how much the council can change the budget after the budget committee has approved the budget. So don't know if it's in this, but I'll talk about that as well. I also alluded that there's a rule on how much transfers you can do from the contingency line item. So by July 15th, we have to have 2 copies of the resolution. I'm not even sure if that's true anymore because we email a lot now, right, since the pandemic. We have to get copies to the county assessor so they can start collecting property taxes in the coming year. And the Oregon Department of Revenue also wants a copy of the budget. So I've got some general questions coming up, but I'll talk about the contingency line. I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it's local budgeting Oregon book. So it's hand out. One of the questions I get every year seems to be, how much can the budget be changed after it's been approved?
For those of you that don't know, Director Piper has won awards for his budget presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I have to say it's a team effort. And I couldn't do it without the council and the budget committee and the other committees that go into even just getting to the budget preparation. We have to go through the water rate advisory committee.
So who gives those awards?
The Government Finance Officers Association in Chicago, Illinois.
Okay.
And they have a checklist and a set of criteria you have to meet. And so when you go through the application process, you want to make sure that the budget checks all the boxes.
Yeah.
And again, they're really pushing towards that. Hey, does it line up with your strategic plan? Is it lining up with your capital improvement plan? Is it lining up with your long-range goals? And so, we try to provide that narrative in the pages of the budget. Before each department, each fund, there is a page that lists some performance measures, and those are pretty awesome. I like seeing the performance measures because I'm just in awe of how many miles of pipe and how many miles of street go into a city, right? Even a small city like Creswell, it's still massive. I believe there's 22 miles of water pipe underneath the streets. It just blows me away. And we showed the current year plus 4 or 5, I think it's 4 years prior, just so you can see progress, right? So we've got those performance measures. Those are important. We have goals for the current year listed as well. Like what do we plan on doing in this fund or this department this year? So hopefully you read through it and see those, and then you look at it and say, okay, does this line up? So looking for that question.
Yeah, 3 listed in here. Oh, no, actually, there's one, that's sorry.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Cameron. I forgot I did put them in the slide. So after the questions slide, I have some prior year questions. I think we covered, if you have questions about the initial budget presentation, please reach out. I don't mind answering those questions. I kind of nerd out on, pulling the data and going, yeah, this is what's going on, this is what we're doing. And if the governing body changes the budget approved by the budget committee in ways that the budget committee does not approve. I mean, this is a real concern, right? I would be concerned if I was on a budget committee for a city, and The governing body has the right to make changes, however, the amount of expenditures for each fund may not increase by more than 10%. Otherwise, it has to go right back to the budget committee. So, they're not gonna be able to revise it substantially. The fact that the council is on the budget committee, there shouldn't be revisions coming anyways, but it's just a question that's always asked. It's in the budget manuals that come out from the state. So can a budget be changed after it's adopted by the governing body? Well, yes, it has to be sometimes. Sometimes something comes our way that we weren't even planning on happening. And then we have to go back and do a supplemental budget. Some circumstances allow us just to go to the council with a resolution. If it's less than 10% of the line item, or not the line item, the expenditure category, so if it's less than 10% of materials and services, or less than 10% of personnel services, you would transfer that money up from contingency, take it out of contingency, and move it up to that line item. For that reason, the city has a policy to keep 15% of operating expenses in the contingency line, so that we have enough to cover at least one line and half of another one in the budget. So
How does that work with items in general fund category? Is it,
so then it would be the total departmental expense. So
Okay.
Public safety, for example.
Okay.
We can only adjust that by resolution of the council of 10% of that line. So let's say that line was $1.5 million, then you're only gonna move $150,000 without going to a public hearing, putting it in the newspaper and saying, hey, we need to have a budget hearing, and here's our budget for this line because of something that was out of our understanding, knowledge at the time that we went through the budget adoption process. So that's key too. It has to be something that wasn't known at the budget adoption process time. And it happens. One of the good things that happens is you get a grant mid-year. Yeah, that's a great time to appropriate those funds and spend them, because generally money that's coming from another source that doesn't require the taxpayers to pay out of their pockets. So when those grants opportunities come through, and sometimes not so great times they come through, like the winter storms where we had to get grants to repair things that were broken. But we did end up getting a new roof at the airport because it was substantially damaged by the amount of snow that we received during that storm.
I had to get new awnings for that one.
Yeah, I'm sure you did.
Sure.
I don't-
Hopefully the insurance came through on that, or,
Part of it, but, it was still like $1,000 out of pocket. It was like $10,000 for new awnings, so.
yeah.
Yeah.
So FEMA covered what insurance wouldn't cover, and then they covered some of the, like we had to pick up tree branches all over town, and so those expenditures were covered for gas to go around and pick them up, and then to dispose of them.
Yeah.
So,
The big thing was income loss coverage. We were closed for 3 days. They don't start covering it until the 4th day.
Do you own your building, or do you
Yeah.
lease it as a
I own it.
franchise?
Yeah.
So, yeah, good or bad, it can happen during the year, and we have to do something to make those appropriations. We can't legally until we do that. So, a lot of times we have grant revenue, and hey, let's go spend it. No, we have to go to the council first and do a supplemental budget, and there's a process. And then we can go out and spend the money, right? But it has to be appropriated legally. I guess this is the time for additional questions. Hopefully I didn't go too fast through the slides. I've done this so many times that it's second nature, but.
When we first look at the proposed budget, I mean, like, what does it look like? How much input do we have as a body to, like, is it just kind of like you draft it and then we like kind of look through it and it's like, yes, that looks okay, or is there more I mean, and then just kind of an open forum about what we see in there. I was just curious about how the process works and how much input a committee normally has.
It'll often depend on how experienced the committee member is. So, as Counselor Shuck could probably attest,
Last year was pretty heated.
yeah.
Yeah, we was stuck on 7% COLA increases for the city employees. There was a counselor and a community member who believed that they proposed 5%, and then we didn't approve that, so we went back to the 7%. And it was because it was directly related to increasing the water utility bill, and how much would that be for a household? So Mayor Stram brought in his personal household water bill, and using what Director had told us through the Q&A portion, he said, well, this is $60 a month. And then coupled with Lane County providing $25,000 grant for those citizens who couldn't afford. And so it's like this big giant puzzle, and you pull one lever and it kind of kicks a piece out that doesn't belong or puts it back in correctly. But yeah, that budget meeting was good 4 hours.
Yeah, you have a good memory.
Excellent.
I had
Yeah.
spaced out that was about COLA, yeah.
Yeah, and then what I voted for 7% because what my situation is that for 3 years the city employees had not received a COLA.
Yeah.
And so when you average the 7% over those 3 years, it's still really tiny. And the fact that you could be losing some of the public works members, the long-term public works personnel, to Cottage Grove or any other government entity. Also, the mention of there becoming a union amongst those individual departments too, and how if we are not competitive, the applicant pool at the time, because everyone was suffering with not having enough applicants, right?
Yeah.
Right.
That, so that's what I'm saying. You have to consider the entire picture and not be focused on just my personal bill is going up $60 a month, and my neighbor's is going up $60 a month, but it's just this whole pie you have to ingest at the same time, because it has so many different pieces.
Excellent.
Very,
So,
very good answer, yes. Thank you so much.
your first year, you're gonna feel like you're drinking out of a fire hose,
Yes.
right? It's like, you're just kind of taking it in, other people will ask questions.
I just listened.
The questions
Exactly.
come.
The first year I didn't, but last year I participated a little more.
Yeah,
I mean,
my third year.
I was on chamber board for
Yeah, we were on
7
the
years,
board
and
together. Cameron did a
Yeah.
lot for the board that I didn't even.
I wasn't very active, but I mean, we sat through a lot of
Yeah.
budgeting, and and so it's like I'm familiar. I can't stand spreadsheets with financial stuff on them. Line items and.
You have other gifts though.
Well, yeah, but I can digest it. I can comprehend it.
Yeah.
It's just I see
You
it.
get
It's
it.
kind of makes me itchy.
Right? See, I live in that world. Keep
Yeah.
on that stuff. So,
Yeah.
no, I
CPAs are a different breed. So
Right.
my brother-in-law's one.
Well,
So you get it.
Yeah.
I appreciate, having been on the Water Rate Advisory Board and the Transportation, I appreciate seeing it all come together. That was very satisfying for me my first year. I'm glad I sat on that roads ad hoc committee. I kind of get this now, And so I think it's good to have citizens that are living in Creswell that can bring the bill, and maybe one of us should try to remember to bring our water sewer bill. Do all 4 of us live on the west side?
I live on the east side.
You live on the
I'm
east
on
side?
the east side.
You're on the east side. So, see, we have a sewer charge that you don't have.
Right.
Yours is separate,
We just have a flat mystery fee.
right? They
That
won't tell
magically
us how they
triples
came
and
to that.
quadruples and.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then we all have the policing fee, but I think it would be really good if a couple of us could remember to bring our bills, because that is always gonna come up, and I know that there are proposed increases this year because we are gonna need a new sewer. treatment plant. So, yeah,
Yeah.
it's good to have your own data and realize, okay, I can maybe handle $4 more a month, but can everybody, and try to weigh that out. And we had a counselor a couple weeks ago, we were talking about, and he said, $8 a month. And another counselor said, wait a minute, so we have a very diverse population here in Creswell. So that's my 2 cents on that.
Right.
Be open to other people's, and I know you will, Cameron, because we were on the chamber board together, but.
Utilities are tricky because you have to cover the expenditures of the utility, and they're.
Yeah, we can't go in debt to give people water.
Right. But so the best way is to have a program to help those people, and Lane County's already stepped up. The state is actually working on a House bill to keep the low-income water assistance program, LIHWAP, similar to LIHEAP. So they've had this low-income household energy assistance program to pay for electricity to keep houses warm. Well, now they're realizing, okay, we have to also do this for water. There's a House bill right now going through the state Senate, and they're working on keeping that program going. We've had it going through the pandemic period, and it was very, very beneficial and helpful, because the utility costs aren't going to go away regardless of what people's personal employment status is going on, right? Yeah, I get that that can be a real challenge for some people. So we try to charge just what it's going to cost for the utility, and we do keep saving reserves because we don't want to end up in debt in the future. Our grandchildren are paying debt on a utility that we could have saved up for in the present, right?
Yeah.
So on say like the fund, different funds, water fund, sewer fund, do we get any direct input from anybody who are kind of in the management of those structures?
Yeah, our
Okay.
public works director,
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, Cliff will come and
Okay.
Cliff will talk. Cliff will speak to us in 2 weeks about the DEQ requirements they just put on
Okay.
us, and our permit renewal, and why his budget information given to Jim is elevated more than last
Yeah.
year, and he'll be part of the committee.
He can get into the weeds, right?
Yeah.
about all the
Yeah,
topics.
that's more just like kind of personal curiosity, because I know one of the things that a lot of like small municipalities, especially in Northwest Oregon, they've been dealing with water quality issues, and the EPA's
Yeah.
going in and forcing them to spend tens of millions of dollars
Right.
on water treatment because they have leftover residual chemicals from timber harvesting and.
Yeah, Creswell just hosted a League of Oregon City meeting here at the community hall, and it was really interesting as we went around the table, all the counselors and mayors and city managers, they just went one city to the next and talked about their biggest struggle, and it was water, roads, roads, water, water.
Yeah.
And, the DEQ is really cracking down hard on.
Yeah, and I know, like, just when we moved to Creswell, which the business has been here, we're coming up close to 10 years, but we've only lived in town for 5 years. But we were very aware, my wife is a cancer survivor, and so we were looking at, like, water quality issues, and Creswell has a fairly raised level of arsenic in there, and so we went and looked for filters that specifically filter that out, and it just made me curious about, with new water quality standards, what we'd be looking at.
Yeah, Cliff is I don't remember how many years he's been here, 18?
Close to that, yeah.
He's very knowledgeable about what we used to have, what we did to upgrade, now what our next upgrade has to be.
Yeah.
It's mind-boggling. And then Director Piper did a good presentation to the Water Rate Advisory Board that just shows the exact impact on the average bill.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's important when we're looking looking at, okay, what is this gonna do to it? And I look at the economy that we're currently in, and I follow the CPI like every month, and watch what's going on. I read the business magazines like the Times and Fortune, and just try to keep up on what's going on.
Yeah.
Currently with the state of the world, economically speaking.
But for me, the wages at my place have been well above minimum for years now, but it's like now that we have a minimum wage automatically tied to CPI, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, you're going up in June, just whether you.
July
This is
1st.
This is
July.
the last year that it's a standard, and then next year it's.
This year, it's tied to CPI. 2022 was the last year where it was,
Oh, okay,
went from 17 to 22
I'm
for
a
the
bookkeeper,
increase.
so I am like preparing to update all my payrolls, everyone,
Yeah.
and a lot of my that's primarily my clients is restaurants, and they can't get anybody, I have one restaurant who pays close to $8 in tips, and on top of that, he has a starting wage of like $16 an hour, so, $22, $23 an hour, and it's,
Wow, I started at Dairy Queen for $3.20 an hour.
It's just, when I first started working for my parents at theirs in Florence, and I think it was $4.75. I tell all the kids, I'm like, you know what, video games cost the same.
I think I started out at 90 cents an hour bucking hay at a dairy farm,
Wow,
so.
thank you for doing that. It gave you good character, right? Brought you here to help us
I weighed
with this.
145 and the alfalfa bells were 120.
Oh, my!
So you had heavy boots to keep them upright.
Wow.
So,
Yeah, we run pretty lean here. We've got 18, well, if you count the judge, and I think we're up to actually 19.77 FTE, so roughly 20 people counting the judge, and like we're lean, but we've been able to keep personnel on, except for my department, the finance office, but we had people retire.
Yeah,
I think during the pandemic, they were close enough to retirement, I think that was
Yeah.
like the final straw, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I'm ready to be done.
and
so-
Maddie got stolen away, which we all kind of thought that's gonna happen.
She's super
She's a
sharp.
shining
So
star.
she's working for the state now, our city planner's working for the state of Oregon.
Yeah.
But she's working on projects that we will be involved in, right? I mean, she's working in development at the state level for rural areas, and so, they took her away, but we have Curtis, who, she brought in as her assistant, and he's pretty great. And,
Yeah, I heard Curtis presenting at the last council meeting that I came to, and yeah.
Yeah, I was
Seemed to-
worried about him last year when we were talking about cost of living. I was like, oh, man, we just put all this responsibility on him.
yeah, we don't get to know names, we just know that
Oh.
there's, that there was, some open positions, so.
Yeah, I was worried about him, but he loves it here, so he says he loves it here.
well, just as a foreshadow, I've been following the state of Oregon, their economists put out a report in December, and, of course, they're tracking CPI. We're all hoping that we reach the Fed's goal of 2% interest someday, some way, right?
Yeah.
And when I looked in March, February's report was out for the Western region, and they're still sitting at like 6.1%. I was like, when is it gonna get down to 3% is kind of the norm, right? Over
Yeah.
the years. And 2% even better if we can get there. And the economists are thinking, and I'm tracking it. The report that just came in for March and April was 5.1%. They're thinking that we'll hit 4 by July 30, and that 2 is kind of going to be a fiscal year 25 thing, give or take. And if we have a recession, that might be the reset button that we need. But it's a lot of crystal ball.
Yeah.
What I don't like is trying to do 2 years out or 5 years out. At first, we started this water rate advisory committee, and it was like, okay, we're gonna meet every year and talk about water. And the standard in the industry is like, let's do a 5-year projection, because we've got capital outlay, and these things are like 5-year, the least of them are 5-year lives. So let's do it in a 5-year cycle. Those can be incredibly off because you're not checking it every year, right? So we do this check-in every year. It's a little more work, but it's work that has to be done anyways to prepare the budget. So it's kind of nice to have these meetings, and we can hash out what's going on in the utility costs and get through that part of the budget. Kind of leading up to the budget meeting, the committee comes out with a recommendation for increases. They recommended a 1% increase in water. Water has been pretty well funded over the years. We have decent reserves. We have been collecting decent STC fees. And so we're sitting right where we should be for water. Sewer, on the other hand, we've got catching up to do. There was this legacy 0.5% increase over year for decades. And when I came on, the sewer fund was so far behind. I think, I want to say we did an initial adjustment like in the teens, like 15%. I don't have it right in front of me, but it was really high for a single year. And that's the problem. If you let off the gas one year, it's going to catch you down the road, and it's going to be a much higher adjustment to catch up. So I think the sewer fund's getting there. We did kind of project out, and it looks like, if we do a 5% this year, we're probably looking at a 9% next year, which is scary to think about. So fingers crossed that, maybe we get a break on something else. And a lot of times when we're budgeting like personnel costs, we're budgeting those, hey, we got a 7% COLA to keep competitive this year, but thank goodness the medical insurance didn't go up this year. It's like,
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
you just hope that something else gives so that you can stay neutral and keep going and that should give you some ideas of how to look over the budget.
Yeah.
And we'll give you the budget message. A little foreshadow there, I read the strategic plan that we just adopted. While I was writing the budget message, had them on each screen. It's like, okay, does this line up? Because I know the GFOA is gonna ding me on it if it's not tracking, and it should track. I mean, that's the council sets the strategic plan. They're kind of steering the ship, and it's a process. It's a long process. When I started auditing governmental entities, I remember after a couple of years of doing it, I'm like, wow, these governments steer like a big battleship, right? I mean, they're just really slow to change direction because they're so big, and there's this process you have to go through to be fair to everybody, and those are good things. But you have to remember when you're looking at a budget, it's basically the direction the council's asked to go. So when you are talking as a budget committee member, you want to keep that in mind. Your fellow counselors are going to be there with you, and they definitely want your input for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely want your input. But I've heard there's been some radical, years before I got here, where meetings just blew up, and somebody on the committee tried to rewrite the entire budget, and it didn't sit well with other counselors, and I think people quit the council. I wasn't here for that, but I've heard stories.
If you get somebody that doesn't understand, the state statute tells us how we can spend the money. And if someone doesn't quite grasp that, it can be very hard conversations and long, because everybody wants to give their opinion.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the other challenges is people's kind of perception of taxes and what's the right place to be, and that's the money that funds
Yeah.
everything. So if
Yeah.
you got to give up something somewhere, and a lot of times there are people who want it both ways, and
I'll give you an example, like we were talking about road repair, and someone said, but we made an expenditure to change the reader board out here. It's not working and not in warranty. And we'll just take that money and fix some road. Can't do that.
Yeah, lawfully.
You cannot do that. And so we want, as counselors, we want public input, but we also want to educate.
Right. Yeah, not everything can be just
Just can't do
simple,
that.
just do this, just do that, yeah.
Okay, we'll take the reader board down and we'll fix one half of a pothole. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just really hard.
Cold patch in, it'll be gone with it. That's
Cold
the
patch,
first
that's-
thing. Yeah, that
that's
cold patch
what I
does
was
not
looking for.
last.
Yeah.
And we're cold patching.
Too much, yeah.
Too much, and stuff not in our jurisdiction, but we're like, come on. If ODOT won't come out and fix the highway, something's gotta give. I mean, we'll throw some cold patch in it and hold it over, and hopefully they'll recognize the need and come out and do the work. And that's where Maddie comes in. Maddie used to just get on them.
Yep.
She got the railroad crossing fixed, after years of.
Yeah, and I've had to try to deal with ODOT before. It is, you talk about a slow-moving ship. That's a ship at anchor.
We had, which committee was it? We had a gentleman in town here who worked for ODOT.
Yeah.
He was on
Water
one
Rate
of them.
Advisory Committee.
Yeah, was it the water rate advisory committee?
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, no, it was the road ad hoc.
It was road ad hoc?
Sorry. I
Oh, that's
remember.
right, because gas tax, he knew a lot about gas tax.
He-
Yeah, that's right. So, yeah, it was really interesting to talk to him because he was like, oh, ODOT doesn't work. You're being logical. ODOT
Yeah.
doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Anyway, not to take up more time.
No.
but Thank you.
So great question. You've been on committees, so you get it, and you just kind of absorb it at first. And
Yeah,
if you have a question, feel free to ask. I mean, there are no dumb questions, right? We need
Yeah.
input.
I'm not afraid to ask questions. I certainly don't want to be the guy that like stretches everything an hour longer by asking a question that's way more complex than.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I'll
Yeah.
say, hey, there's a lot of variables in that, maybe.
Yeah.
I'll get back to you after the meeting, I'll send you an email. I just answered a question today on property taxes. I mean, it's so complicated. I mean, there's 2 ballot measures that affect how property taxes
Right.
are
We don't know
calculated.
what's going to happen with, it's the jail and the school?
The school is one of them that's out there
Okay.
right now, yeah, and the
Yeah.
jail's out there, but I mean, those are bonds. And then you've got education taxes that are capped at $5 for your taxing district. So when you get your tax bill, you've got like this laundry
Oh, I
list
don't
of
even open
districts that are on that bill. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not just the city of Creswell, it's the city of Creswell and the library district and the fire district.
It's included in my.
And now bonds are like
I have an FHA loan, so I don't think it's.
the bond yields are so bad.
A lot of them are just retiring a bond and bringing them, and the new bond is that
Yeah.
price because they don't want to.
That's what I think the jail one is.
I think so. I think you're right. I didn't sit through that one. But
We got a flyer at last night's work session, and I read that and thought, oh, why haven't I?
it's much easier to do that than to pose an entirely new
Yeah.
one. I mean, retire the old one, bring the new one in at the same rate, and then it's what's been there all along, but. it's
So it
crazy.
says, this isn't a new tax, it's just a continuation of the, yeah, it's not a new tax, it's just continuing that same levy rewritten. I don't know, I haven't formed an opinion yet.
And then there's
I
the
just
market
don't
value and
know.
assessed value. As a realtor, you probably appreciate that, right?
Oh,
Like,
yeah, it's totally two different
when
things.
you buy your home, that's the market
It's what-
value and the assessed value
But
that
the
first
people will
year.
pay.
Right.
But then every year it can only go up 3%, so the market can go crazy and have like,
Yeah,
quadruple the price of homes, but your home is only gonna be assessed 3%.
yeah.
Every year, additional assessed value, not market value, but just assessed taxable value. And that's actually pretty good for a revenue stream.
Very good,
Because if the market's doing this,
yeah.
it doesn't really affect collections. Of
Yeah,
property
you
taxes
can
and
basically
whatnot,
build in the 3% to your budget every year.
regardless of whether you have
Yeah.
a recession or if it's a banner.
Because you know you're gonna be so far behind that even if the market goes up and up and up and tanks, you're still below the mark on assessed. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So sales tax, on the other hand, absolutely volatile to the economy. Unfortunately, we don't have that. That's a challenging one, the budget, for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know where you're gonna land on that. So as somebody who writes the budget, I appreciate that we don't have a sales tax. It's much more crystal ball than
Yeah.
the property tax. So these are complex things that I can geek out and to explain in detail of, outside of the meeting. I can pull up detail on an individual expense line and kind of get back to you with, hey, well, this is what's going on. Here's what we did. Here's what we spent on this project, and I can go item by item on it.
Yeah.
So I encourage questions in the meeting. I also encourage you to email me outside the meeting. I may tell you in the meeting, hey, I'll have to get back to you. I'll email you the details on that. And then I'll share that with everybody in a Q&A so that all the counselors can see it, all the budget committee members can see it. And, oh yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm glad somebody asked that question.
And so on those meetings, I heard you say one lasted for 4 hours, but how much time do you normally budget for them?
I try to get in and out there in 2 hours.
Yeah,
And
okay.
that's
kind of what I figured.
After that, I think your return.
Start losing.
Right?
Well, yeah, last night about
Y'all
9
were-
o'clock, I said, I was really fired up about Santa Pac proposal, and then the mayor said, we're gonna hold on to that for a minute. And when we got back to it, I said, I'm so damn tired. I need this to be over.
Yeah.
And I wanted to talk for like 20 minutes, and I just said 2 sentences.
I came to a workshop because I wanted to hear more about the tough fee, and there was a conversation, something before and after I was here for 3 hours. I'm like, I'm
Oh.
done.
Yeah.
You've had some long meetings lately.
Yeah.
We've been to midnight before.
It was like
So-
9:45, and I'm like, I'm done. I'm out.
Yeah, the strategic plan was quite a undertaking, and I'm glad that's not every year. Yeah, the next one I think is after my term ends. Then I'll be back when I retire, and it'll be okay then. You can keep me up late at night then.
It'll be taken care of.
Last night, there were so many items on the agenda that were
It was-
kind of like bad news type things, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it was just news, but it was like, wow, I've never seen so many hard issues in one meeting in my
Yeah.
entire time here. And
Even
it's
4th
going
of
on in
July
every city.
baloney was it was one subject.
It was one subject,
Yeah.
that's all. Yeah, now it's multiple, like,
This was-
the sky is falling. And I'm just keeping my chin up and
Yeah,
trying to get through the meetings. It just seems like maybe things were held for so long during the pandemic that now the floodgates are opening. And
I don't know.
we're dealing with real issues
Yeah.
again.
Well, I think a lot of those things were maintained by people who basically kind of aged out of it too.
Yeah.
And it's so many like municipal and social functions in our country have been held by an older generation, and there wasn't a whole lot of like handing of the torch. And I think some of that was intentional and some of it was just, environmental and.
We had big turnover in council. I mean, I left the planning commission because the council had a vacancy and had like 3 at once. 3 vacancies at once is really hard
Yeah.
for a council
Comes in waves.
to get to quorum.
Yeah.
And I just try to take notes, like, okay, how is this affecting the budget?
Right.
What direction are we going, and where do we need to put the money, the numbers in boxes? I say, I tell everybody, I just put numbers in boxes, right? And
Yeah.
so.
Just dress in camouflage and stand against the wall.
Well, I appreciate you all being here and volunteering because we
I was
need
strong
lots of
armed by
events.
Dave.
Oh, good.
No.
unless you guys have any questions, further questions in this meeting, I'll call it an end. And guys, my email address is in the slides. Free to email me anytime.
Are all of the budget meetings 6:30?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think that allows some people who work till 6 to get here.
Yeah, 6:30 is a good time. I was like busting to get dinner on the table for everybody and
That too.
Yeah, my people got leftovers.
yeah. Well, mine kind of did too, so, but everybody got fed.
Thank you for putting up with my presentation.
Different.
Thanks.
So you have a family member